Up next, the 1920 bank robbery that shook the county. Stick around. Hi, I'm Gail Street, and this is Paths to the Present. Sometimes historical times are romanticized. We think that days gone by were safer, that doors were left unlocked, and strangers could be trusted. And to some extent, that was true. But bad things happened back then, too. Today's show looks at one such event, the notorious Sandy Spring bank robbery of 1920. We also bring you another success story with a visit to the last tavern still standing in the county. But first, see if you can answer today's history quiz. We asked the question, what happened here? Look closely among the trees and you can make out some dilapidated wooden structures of different sizes and shapes. They are spread out over an acre or two in this parkland situated on MacArthur Boulevard near the C&O Canal at Great Falls. Think you know what this was? Stay tuned. I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. In the 18th and early 19th century, taverns were the center of the community. They got their start because travelers needed places to stop, to rest, and to refresh themselves and their horses. For that reason, in Montgomery County, they were often located about 16 miles outside of Georgetown, this area's port city. 16 miles was about as far as most horses could travel in a day. At one time, there were about 24 licensed taverns here in Montgomery County. Today, only one remains. Welcome to Higgins Tavern. It was built in 1823 along the Brookville to Georgetown Road, our Georgia Avenue today. Recently restored, this building is now home to Penny Chocolates, where folks come from all around to enjoy delicious homemade candy and artisan gelato. But when this building was first constructed, it drew people for other reasons. Susan Soderberg, education and outreach planner for historic preservation, explains.
Well, in the 19th and 18th centuries, taverns were the centers of the community. They were where gentlemen gathered for meetings, for political rallies, to vote, and also to play cards and imbibe liquor and all the things you associate with taverns today as well.
Once there were many colonial taverns in Montgomery County. There was Hungerford's Tavern in Rockville and Doughton's Ordinary in Clarksburg. They all began as small log structures just like this tavern.
Well, the original building is the log section, and the log section, it's been restored to the way it looked back in the 1820s when it was first built.
In the 1860s, the building was expanded by Margaret Higgins, the tavern's namesake.
And this is more of a Victorian style, but not really ornate Victorian building, but it accommodated a larger capacity for customers, and also it allowed for the family living upstairs in the building as well.
Only a few years ago, it was hard to see this building at all. Architect Mish Bowles was in charge of its restoration.
The building, frankly, was a mess, and it was surrounded by trees. Many people didn't even know it existed, even though it had been here for almost 200 years. So as it became revealed, as the trees were cut down, people would come up and ask me, say, "What's that building doing there?" I said, "Well, it's been there all along."
Higgins Tavern closed in the late 1800s, and the building stood vacant for some time.
Then the Martin family purchased it, and there may be some people around who still remember Martin's Dairy and the ice cream store they had here where they sold ice cream. And then in the 1960s, it was the Silo Inn, all the way up until 1998. So there are a lot of people who remember fondly the Silo Inn and the restaurant.
The Silo Inn was replaced by a brand new shopping center. Its developer, Finmark Management, also bankrolled the restoration of Higgins Tavern. From the very start, Cheryl Snyder wanted to locate her candy and gelato business here because, as she puts it, the building is a perfect fit.
It was a handcrafted building back in the 1820 for one part and 1850 in the other. So there's a lot of artistry in the building, a lot of care taken in making the building, and I thought it was a good fit for me because I take a lot of care in my product.
Restoring the tavern was no easy matter. Every step revealed new challenges.
It was a constant process of revealing what was there, and a constant process of evaluating the building, what could be saved, and what we could keep. And we kept really as much as we could of the original fabric, and I'm proud of that.
The biggest challenge was the foundation. What little there was crumbling. To correct that and to replace wood that had rotted along the base, elaborate scaffolding held up the structure while the work was done underneath.
So we have now a brand new foundation around the entire building with a basement with a commercial heating and cooling system in place. A difficult thing to do, as well as obviously the building needed to be electrified and sprinkled. So all of those things happened within this very small building. I brought it up to a commercial code. I'm afraid a bit of a square peg in a round hole.
But all that work was worth it. Not only has the last remaining Montgomery County Tavern been preserved, but it's been given a new life, dishing out mouth-watering treats for all who stop in.
It's going great. We've had a great reception from people. Everyone in Olney is very attached to the building, so people have been watching the progress, and they're just delighted to have a local business here. So there's a lot of community support. It's been really great.
Crime is not a recent phenomenon. History is filled with its share of crooks, gangsters, and felons, and Montgomery County's past is no exception. Offenses weren't very common because there weren't very many people. But like we learn in the next segment, when something horrible did occur, it gripped the entire county. In 1920, the village of Sandy Spring was a busy crossroads community. There were, among other things, a general store, an insurance company, and a bank. Surrounding farmers, mostly Quakers, depended on it for their provisions. Most traveled the unpaved, rutted roads by horse and carriage, but some used the recently invented automobile. People knew one another, and the town felt safe. But something happened on April 26, 1920, that changed everything. Retired Montgomery County Police Detective Jack Toomey explains.
About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a man strolled into the bank behind us and walked up to one of the employees and asked to see a Baltimore telephone book. And he was accommodated. He leafed through the phone book for a short time, handed it back to the employee, and walked out, and no one thought anything different. A few minutes later, a 1920 red Hudson automobile pulled up in the street right in front of the bank. The driver remained behind the wheel, and 5 men entered the bank and produced pistols and announced a holdup.
This building has been here since 1895. It was the first permanent home of the Sandy Spring Savings Institution, as it was called at the time. When the crime occurred, the interior looked like this. This is what it looks like today. At the time of the robbery, there were no customers. However, 4 bank employees were on duty, along with a member of the bank's board of directors. His name was Francis Hollowell, and he was hard of hearing. Not understanding what was going on, he didn't respond quickly enough and was shot dead by one of the armed men. The 4 employees were tied up while the cash drawers were emptied. More than $37,000 was taken, a huge sum for the time. Before escaping, the robbers locked the employees in the vault, which is behind this door.
Apparently about 10 to 15 minutes later, either a customer or another bank official walked into the bank and found Mr. Hollowell laying dead on the floor, and he could hear the muffled cries of the employees who were in the vault. So knowing that a Mr. Farquhar, who happened to work next door, who was a former employee of the bank, they went over and got Mr. Farquhar, who remembered the combination of the vault, and he dialed the combination and released the hostages, I guess you could say, from the vault.
Meanwhile, townspeople crowded around the bank. Men who had automobiles formed a posse, and they sped off hoping to catch up with the red Hudson.
The only law enforcement at the time was the sheriff of Montgomery County, who apparently lived fairly close. It was Sheriff Nicholson, the elected sheriff, and he arrived at the bank within a few minutes and realized the enormity of the crime, and having absolutely no resources to investigate this, he placed a call to the Washington, D.C. Police Department. And he got in touch with the chief of detectives, who then selected 6 to 7 of his best men, and they were put into the fastest automobile that the Washington police owned. And within 45 minutes time, they sped out Georgia Avenue and arrived here right in front of the bank.
Area newspapers covered the crime and the investigation. Rewards were offered. Within 3 months, 5 men were apprehended. They were held in this Montgomery County jail awaiting their trial, which was moved to Frederick in order to find an impartial jury.
4 or 5 of the men were convicted of murder and robbery, while the driver of the car, who never entered the bank, was acquitted, most likely because nobody could positively identify him. And they were all sentenced to life in prison, and 2 of them died violently in jail, one trying to escape.
This crime rocked the entire state. There was regular coverage in all the newspapers. Nothing like this had ever happened here before, and there was pressure on Maryland's governor to do something.
So by 1921, Governor Ritchie, by an act of the legislature, formed the Maryland State Police. And not to be outdone, by early 1922, the legislature also voted that Montgomery County could form a county police force. And on July 4th of 1922, 6 men who had been constables in the various election districts were sworn in as police officers, and they formed the first Montgomery County police force.
It was a tragedy what happened to Francis Hollowell. He left behind a wife and a young son. He was laid to rest here in this cemetery not far from the bank, next to the Sandy Spring Meeting House. This family's personal misfortune helped lay the foundation for modern law enforcement that we've come to rely on today. So let's see how you made out on our history quiz. We asked what happened in this parkland off MacArthur Boulevard, where dilapidated wooden structures now stand behind a chain-link fence. This was the site of the Maryland Mine, a gold mine active in the late 1800s. At one time, there were countless mines in Montgomery County, with the majority located in the hills along the Potomac River. These were big operations, employing lots of people in what was a dangerous and grueling occupation. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, send an email to paths-present@verizon.net. Be sure to tune in again next time as Paths to the Present looks at a movie from the 60s that featured many Montgomery County locations. See you then.